Oh yeah, we started. Rose says that the sound is good, so I'm super happy. I'm gonna grab. How was everybody's holiday? Good.
Good.
Noisy.
Yeah, definitely.
Yeah. Too loud. pretty hot. Really hot. So we're talking about all the heat waves and stuff like that. Lots of heat waves in the news. It's the nice thing about Southern California is like after 8 p.m. it's usually all right, even though on hot days.
We're lucky now.
Yeah. All right. July 7th from the Blavatsky quote book. This is a really quick one. The beginning of Isis unveiled. Man's spirit proves God's spirit, as the one drop of water proves the source from which it must have come. I think that's a pretty solid concept for most of us. She says that, and other Theosophists say that in a lot of different ways, that same kind of thing. It's the monad monadis you were just talking about, Plato. It's that is, and it's beautiful. It's definitely one of the concepts that was the most this is definitely one of the concepts that was the most reasonable and logical that just definitely fit in when I began studying Theosophy, because I was already aware of the concept from the metaphysicists, but not put so eloquently. I never was able to really read Spinoza.
It's very obscure.
People again, yeah, it's just my friend gave me a Spinoza book, and she was like, "Oh, you know about the monad?" And I'm like, but she thought he made up the monad. She studied him in college, but that was his word. So she gave me this book, and it's just equations, like the whole thing. It's wild. All right, so we'll get started here. I don't think we jumped into this chapter yet at all, even though I think we ended pretty squarely at the end there. So basically, what's happening now? We're still in Mumbai, Bombay back then, I guess. We're still in Bombay, and now we have the publishing of the Theosophist magazine. We're really familiar with a lot of the articles we have in our pamphlets and our bigger books from that magazine. So it became like the main source of theosophical literature, and it was H.P.B. was the main editor for a long time, and that's when obviously a lot of the meat came out. It was really nice because it was some of the I'm sure some of you guys have read some of the really famous first articles from the first issue. Is one called "What is Theosophy?" and there's one called "What is the Theosophist?" for Theosophists, and they're very good because they're very fundamental information, especially like the three objects and going over the theosophical view of reincarnation and karma. And it's it's early, but it's still exactly what we're talking about today. It's cool to see it kind of in the first time that put forth as a statement. And then it was pretty cool because it talks about how this is almost hard to believe for us now, but it became like a major publication of philosophy and philosophical ideals in the country of India, and that's wild. It's got to have a big part to do with why early Theosophy was so influential in Indian politics early on, is because there's a lot of people reading this stuff. The predecessors have gone. And so one interesting thing it goes over right here, I'll just read this real quick, is it talks about something we all know, is that this tradition of wisdom and religion is not the first time anybody said Theosophy, Theosophia. We know that this is an idea. And the wisdom religion goes back thousands and thousands of years, pre-Plato, pre-anything we can really think that I can understand. But it's been with us all along. And something that I find really interesting, I'll read this first, is it was shown to be much more than a speculative inquiry, which it did appear to some at first, especially when she was kind of finishing with the spiritualists and then kind of really going off against the Catholic Church. That it was a lot more than that, and what it was the profound conceptions of Vedic philosophy and of Buddhism, the teachings of the Egyptian hierophants, of Pythagoras and Plato, the Neoplatonic system, Gnostic mysticism, the metaphysical ideas of Leibniz, Spinoza, Hegel, and Fichte, as well as Kabalistic doctrines and the medieval teachings of alchemical regeneration, and finally the transcendentalism of Ralph Waldo Emerson, are all related to this article and considered as either direct or indirect expressions of the archaic wisdom religion. So when I study, every time I read a lot of these things, I find that, especially in Western tradition, we have there's a bit of a gap between, I'd say, the early medieval and then kind of the Renaissance. Consider Theosophical views. I mean, it depends on if you consider a lot of the popular occultists, like, Rippa and D. And I mean, I don't know how much they're kind of counted within the wisdom tradition, because they pushed a lot of boundaries and had, a lot of other, like, more wild ideas. But something I would like to just ask, if you guys have any examples of kind of some people, some teachers, or even schools of thought that we don't focus on a lot as Theosophists, and we're part of this, because there's more. There's a lot more. It's just, I think, for myself, I tend to focus on like Plato and the metaphysicists, and I really kind of focus on a lot of what they just said here, that kind of track record. And I'm wondering if anybody has anything to add, like anybody or schools we don't think too much of.
Well, even like some of the founding fathers, like that were Masons, Thomas.
Ooh, we're gonna get right into it. Perfect. Yeah.
Some of those had, similar ideas and more maybe pure or, ideal of Masonry.
That's great, yeah. And those ones, that too is a reason why those don't, pop up really quick, is because they're extremely secretive. Like, they really kept those ones close to the chest until within the last century. Masonry has kind of been demystified and opened up. But that stuff was kept in, and that's
It was dangerous.
yeah, too. There's a lot of rights and
A lot of royalties that were killed by the Pope, and we don't really know it unless someone studies history, and you see that it wasn't just witches and mystics that were burned. There were a lot of wars started over, which religion was going to rule that country.
Absolutely.
And then there were people like Paracelsus and Saint Germain, who weren't really teachers. They had a kind of different mission. There were people that studied what they did, but they were in they had a different job to do. Saint Germain was very influential among the wealthy aristocratic kings and queens, but they didn't follow or try to do what he was warning them they should do. And then that caused the French Revolution.
Yeah. That's a really good point. The politics part, we see a lot pretty soon as to why that's a really good idea that Theosophy made very, very early, was to stay out of politics, because we see what, similar spiritual movements or ideas, what happens when they're embroiled with politics. And there's a lot of the mystical, I know some really knowledgeable Masons and things like that, and they really believe that there's been a lot lost because of them just being, almost political bodies for hundreds of years without really delving too deeply into the mysticism of it anymore. Like, I found out I really love that Garibaldi and his red silk shirts and the whole story of him and his kind of ideals and everything. And the Masonic order that he came from was Italian, called the Carbonari. just, I think it means burning charcoal or something like that. It's really cool, but there's almost nothing known anymore. Like it's gone. And like most Masons like that have gone through a lot of orders have heard of it, but no one really knows anymore, you know. And the Rosicrucians, that's a word that, you know, Masons throw around a lot. So, you know, as we found in Theosophy, especially in like Isis, there's a lot to the Knights of the Rosy Cross. But yeah, then we have things like the Crusades and
So I'd like to add,
sure.
just concerning Masonry, there was the issue of during the time prior to France with the Illuminati kind of overtaking Masonry. There were certain aspects of the group.
Oh, and the Austrian part?
And so, and I'm not saying good or bad, I'm just saying that that tends to cloud the two groups.
Mhm.
But I think his name is Westerfall. He was a preacher. And so he's the one that really created this mania and of theory masonry. And so that's interesting just to see that aspect of it, because it goes back to like the idea of Justinian, who shut down all the Platonic schools and that whole lineage. He was the Byzantine bishop,
Where my name comes from.
and
They called him the last Roman. Yeah.
And so, so there was this, you know, there was this constant battle between, well, not between, it was the Christians of a certain sect that was opposed to what they call paganism.
Yeah.
And so, so some of the names I wanted to bring up is Parmenides, Heraclitus, Xenophon, and then there's Platon Gemistos, and he was one of the few that maintained the Platonic lineage during that period of time, and a very amazing man. And he was very selective who was allowed, who he taught, who he initiated. And one of the bishops at that time destroyed his works, but there was enough that remained to where there's a couple of translations that are available. The other one,
Love destroying each other's writings back then.
Well,
well, when you say,
It's an easy way to get rid of a teaching.
Oh, yeah.
If you had to copy it, people
People
didn't.
Almighty.
Yeah.
It's pretty impressive.
and so, I don't want to say destroying each other's teachings. It was, you know, I mean, Christians back, a certain sect of Christians, I mean, they destroyed, I mean, they were very murderous toward Hypatia. Someone else that's not talked of often is Diotima. Diotima was Socrates' initiate. I mean, Diotima initiated Socrates, and that's in Symposium. She was a woman. And then a little bit in modern times, which would be about the 11th century, there's Nicholas de Cusa. So there's some people who were in the Nicholas de Cusa was like a high within the Catholic Church. I forget what his standing was, but he was very much a Platonist. And so you can read his writings. So there's a lot of people like, and going back to like Parmenides like Socrates met with Parmenides when Socrates was like 10 years old or a little bit older, and Zeno. So a lot of, you know, Heraclitus, Xenophon, the pre-Socratics.
Yeah.
Often don't get mentioned.
Yeah.
And not studied as well.
Yeah.
And the Vedas and the ancient.
The Veda. Yeah, yeah. I also, I don't know if I mentioned this, but I think also there was not a shift, because you've always seen theosophical ideas in literature, and what we call mythologies, and back from like Gilgamesh. But I also think there's, because of the printing press after a few centuries, but also because a lot of the stuff was being copied, even what they considered literature was being copied a lot more by hand before the printing press. I think we were able to see a lot of theosophical ideas start to be delivered through, poetry, plays, epics. I mean, it's Milton and Dante, of course, and like even, and that makes you kind of remember the Homers and stuff, and like what an important part of like Theosophy that is. And the wonderful thing that we see, the Theosophical idea of cycles, and we start to see a lot of these tales happen. We see the true cycles, and how that continues to just kind of macro out into everything. But
That's why memory is important. And I mean, back then they memorized
oh yeah,
their texts.
there's so much stuff we wouldn't have without word of mouth. Just yeah.
Oh, and the memorization of the texts and being able to recite. And there's, there's a piece of history to where during the Crusades, one of the influences of Luther to make the Bible available to everybody was the result of the Crusades within the Islamic realm, within the Levant. And the soldiers, the Crusaders who came back said, they have their book memorized, they recite it, it's available to everybody. And that was another, push for Luther to make the Bible accessible versus this text that was not available to the common peasant.
Yeah, well, I mean, that's for a long time. That's how a lot of the Christian, cloth kept so much power, because they were the only ones allowed to read these very few copies that were only in Latin. And so, I mean, but it's so much. So, like, it's so interesting that a lot of churches back then, where you went there and you listened to what this guy told you was in the Bible, and like now, I've gone to a lot of Christian churches, and it's just been there's still plenty of people that just don't read the Bible and still.
Yeah, because there's a book to read, doesn't mean
Yeah.
people read it. They go and they get their sermon. And that's what that's what.
A lot of people did that too,
Yeah.
but at least they had the option.
Yeah, it was amazing, like what these people would have given for an English copy of the Bible in like 1300. Yeah. I mean, how the Septuagint, I mean, the first few printings ended up in debts for the printers.
Go ahead, that's
Well, so, yeah, you mentioned wisdom tradition, wisdom religion. Yes. So, like, we often hear a lot about Eastern teachings, this at this time. And then it was mentioned a lot of Western teachers when they say, so occultists always have been all over the world. We can say that Theosophy or wisdom religion has no country, never has. It doesn't belong to any country. So all the time, but we see in cycles you mentioned, because maybe sometimes you see that Eastern goes through certain, whether the enlightenment or oscillation cycles, maybe when we're going through this oscillation cycle, and so it changes. But the idea of sometimes mentioned, from India, from the Himalayas, trans-Himalayas, cis-Himalayas, it's not only the geographical meaning of it, sometimes it's metaphysical. Just like Shambhala, Jerusalem. Lord, it could mean something else, not only something geography wise. So the idea is that Theosophy or wisdom religion really has no country, it belongs to all.
It's no west, it's no east.
So
He always finds the means to go through and be presented to the world in whatever means are available at that time.
this is also why universal brotherhood is such an integral part of the equation like that. You couldn't have one without the other. That's Go ahead.
Sorry.
I was just gonna say that, along with the line that you're saying, because that east and west thought is really like a occidental idea, due to the colonial age. And, but one can be initiated without any time, initiated into the reality of death. That brings in the philosophical question, what is death? What is life? And that can happen at a very early age for an individual. And that's a path starting into philosophy. That's true philosophy, study of death and life, wisdom. And so, but I was going to say that anyway, I think I forgot part of what I was going to say, but it's a huge misnomer for the East and the West. And to talk in those terms is incorrect. And a lot of people forget, not at this table, but the amount of travel that took place. You know, I mean, like during the time of home, the major shipping lines that were transpiring and taking place, and then during the time of I'll just say Muhammad, prior to his vision, you know, there were these great trade routes. And so you had people from India, you had the Persian school of philosophy, you had the
Chinese.
Right, the Chinese.
The Manichaeism.
You know, there's a gentleman who wrote Islam in Confucian terms, and followed that back like in the 16th century, 17th, 16th century, and it was through his travels, and he was from China. And so, people traveled and talked to each other during these trade routes and studied philosophy. And you had the Platonists that got dispersed as a result of Justinian, and they went to Persia and they went to Syria. And so anyway, so these ideas have been, that's why you see the lineage, you see the thread going through, you know, different systems that are the same, just different terminology often that's used. And partly that terminology is a result of translators. Like in Plato, there's a lot of self in the Socratic lineage, self, but it doesn't get translated until recently. Whereas you read self in the Vedic, you read self in Tibetan Buddhism, you know, it gets translated more easily. Same thing, it's within Islam. So anyway, so I think it's a misnomer. A lot of people, you know, just because we have planes, I think nobody, you know, traveled from India to Syria to Persia to.
Well, they did, but it wasn't the average person.
A lot of times,
Well,
You had trade routes. You had
yeah.
trade routes. Those are average people.
It was, you know, a particular group of people that could actually do it. Yeah, and that didn't mean they were wealthy. That meant because they were the ones taking the goods or bringing the goods back. Yeah.
But it was much more common for
Than
people,
what people think.
yes, and people who came back from a trip, who then shared among their community, you know, ideas. I mean,
It's incredible, but one little history thing that I love, there's still a handful.
even how, I just want to say, even how the ideas from India moved up into China, Japan, Tibet, you know, and watching that transformation from Sanskrit, Pali, you know, into the other languages and the changing of societies. So
Yeah, there's because the records started to be kept, you know, better. There's in like the Chinese dynasties at the same times like Rome, and there's quite a few pretty cool historical accounts of like Platonists and what, you know, people from the Greek school of philosophy is what they said back then. When they ran into Buddhists,
Hellenism, Nagarjuna.
they could really like jive with each other. And it was like, and they are like, how's this? They moved from other ends of the planet. Like, but your original teachers probably weren't. Like the teachers that you both have somewhere way back a common teacher, a common source, and that's what we're teaching. And it's, they're way back somewhere. And yeah, that would have just been super cool to be to see.
When you had Hellenism and you had Alexandria, who was
Oh yeah.
who was really an Aristotelian. But so then you had some schools that came with Alexandria. And so you had Taxlia by the Black Sea, where now Juno grew up next to Taxlia. And so there you have, and even the depiction of the Buddhists, you see changed into Greek.
Oh yeah, Hellenized, yeah.
And so, and Hellenism was huge.
Yeah.
And transforming, bringing ideas into different regions. Anyway, it's just not as close.
Yeah, no, it's one more thing. I was just watching this thing where they were talking about cuneiform and talking about the Code of Hammurabi and stuff, and just I love language stuff. And they were talking about there's this concept even among historians that Sumerians were like, that they were Stone Age cavemen that were figuring out cuneiform. And it's like, look, and you think of like Sumerian cities. I mean, they were some of the first like super cities, and ziggurats, like the city of Ur, what you're talking about was like the major cosmopolitan like center of trade routes. And that's the thing, it's too long ago. They couldn't have had like, apartments and like urban living. There's no way. It's those, man, it's monstrous. What a big place. But yeah, it's something it's fun to keep. It's why I think history is important, because that's that perspective. We get a little fancy pants as modern people, thinking that we're somehow better than the cycle of history that we see the humanity has been like kept to just over and over. And we're like, every cycle, we don't need to stop this stuff, And I think that's, one big reason is what's coming up here that I kind of want to shift to is we're talking when she's talking about forming the society. One thing that she makes very clear here is this. With the whole concept, she made very clear that she was kind of modeling the society after the Constitution of the Motherland, which they were considering calling America, and also in concert, I guess, with the seventh race appearing here one day. But you hear, a lot of times nowadays when we hear about the Constitution or even the Declaration of Independence, it's so politicalized that you're almost, you have to be on some side of a spectrum to respect these things, these documents. And I don't think so with those two at all. But so it says, born in the United States of America, the society was constituted on the model of its motherland, the latter omitting the name of God from the Constitution, lest it should afford a pretext one day to make a state religion, gives absolute equality to all religions and its laws, all support, and each is in turn protected by the state. The society modeled upon this Constitution may fairly be termed a republic of conscience. And so what she's saying kind of here is that we need to take the whole the faith aspect out of this document and out of the way that we're formed, because then we're going to be completely at the mercy of future dogma, of prophets, of the things that pop up in a lot of these pure ideals and these things that start out as very kind of a sectarian good organizations that can get co-opted. We see it constantly. Does anybody want to read this part? It's going to be on page 74. The middle of the final paragraph starts here. First of all.
Sure. Okay.
You got it?
74,
Like halfway, sorry.
Can you read part of the sentence? I can't read it.
on page 74.
Can you read a little bit more of the sentence?
Yeah. It starts, students of Theosophy, if once they attain genuine understanding of these principles, will find themselves unable to fall into sectarian habits of mind.
Okay.
I find that sentence I just read really interesting because it's like, sounds a little like, oh, well, we're students of Theosophy, so we're not going to fall into these, habits.
Start at the begin, a little bit above that.
Yeah, sure, please.
Principles.
Oh, yeah, please.
Okay. Principles of the Theosophical movement, however, so clearly expressed in the years of its foundation, contain implicit safeguards,
I got it.
implicit safeguards against the usual fate of such benevolent organizations or societies. Students of Theosophy, if once they attain to genuine understanding of these principles, will find themselves unable to fall into sectarian habits of mind. First of all, the aim of forming a nucleus of universal brotherhood is a dynamic which calls forth from men the spiritual resources which no lesser ideal can command. Second, the idea of gaining knowledge through experience from the book of nature is uncompromisingly opposed to the moral and intellectual passivity which characterizes Western religion, and which is the root cause of sectarianism. Finally, the joining of metaphysical study with mystical religion introduces the factor of gradual growth in mind, making progress in Theosophy a matter of definite steps to be taken by the inquirer. This progress, moreover, cannot be neglected without losing the spirit of the theosophical ideal, for Theosophy, as defined in these early articles by Madame Blavatsky, must be studied, practiced, and lived in order to be understood.
Thank you so much. I think a lot of people identify with that. I wouldn't have put it so concisely, but the book of nature, how the knowledge of a theosophist, true theosophist, has to be gained through the book of nature, like means, also living in these experiences, trying to put these ethics and these morals into practice, that book of nature that we're writing ourselves every day. And the way that she never stopped hammering home until the day she died, that this is not a passive activity, that this is not a passive path to take. This isn't to study and keep to yourself and try to, feel like you're better than other people. Like, if we're not actively engaged in this, then, she says we're going to fall into the problem, the trap of Western religion is how she said it, but so many organizations, we see so many, and it's nice to see that there's these safeguards built against some of these things, and it's definitely like, it seems to me, it kind of keeps at least the ULT and probably the early society, it meant to keep it from being, usurped from false prophets, for the lack of a better word, and things like that. But you can see, still, you can safeguard something as much as you want, just like they thought they were doing with the Constitution and all these amendments. But there's loopholes. People find a way to manipulate things any way they can. I mean, some of my favorite novels, some people's, or even the consensus interpretation, I'm like, that's not what I thought it was about, and so I choose to kind of stick with mine. But yeah, so let's see here. Yeah, so I mean, again, that's something I think we don't talk about enough, is what is that book of life? How, especially at this point, what were we doing then to really not be passive, to live theosophically? We're for the first time, we're talking about karma, reincarnation, and some of these things in, for the lack of a better word, like a Western theater. What was being active and what is being an active theosophist, other than, just helping our fellow man, the broad sense, anybody?
Well, it's, in so many words, it is explained here. Example, the students of Theosophy if once we attain to genuine understanding of this principle, describing the three objects, will find themselves unable to fall into sectarian habits of mind. And then, first of all, the aim of forming a nucleus of universal brotherhood, the dynamic which calls for from men the spiritual success which no lesser ideal can command. And then second, the idea, I'm going to go to this one. Second, the idea of gaining knowledge through experience from the book of nature, as you mentioned, in uncompromisingly opposed to the moral and intellectual passivity which characterizes people. And finally, joining the metaphysical study with mystical religion. So two things. Metaphysical study with mystical religion introduces the factor of gradual growth in mind. So here, it's given us the idea that we grow in mind. And therefore, by growing in mind, yes, changing our way of thinking, then we become freer from all the traditions, the beliefs and systems of very published. So in a way, we become moral because by using these ideas and practicing, because at the end, almost at the end of the page, it says, as defined, for Theosophy, as defined in these early articles of Madame Blavatsky, must be studied, practiced, lived in order to be understood. So it's not only, the idea of changing the thoughts in your mind, but it's something that you make practical in your daily life, just so you live through them. And that's what becomes conviction, rather than blind faith.
Mhm.
So we may use that word faith, but it's through the personal experience, learning, living it, and that becomes not blind faith.
Sure.
Because then you begin to believe a lot of these things because you are living them really in your everyday life.
Yeah, I think you just kind of put, oh yeah, one sec. Yeah, I think you just put the kind of the nail on the head there with, like, I was going to ask kind of what the difference to a lot of us is with religion between the mystical and the mundane. And I think you really kind of put the head on what you just said is like, we don't have the element of the necessity of faith in the mystical study of religion. Go ahead, Liz.
Yeah, as far as I understand is that the Theosophy school or Theosophy philosophy is not exclusive but inclusive.
Mhm.
And it includes me into the nature. I am part of the nature. And it's giving you some keys, some tools, for instance, analogy correspondence, where you can develop this second idea, fundamental object, where you can play dance with any system, and I go anywhere and I compare those ideas of the other philosophical systems and science and religions. And at the end, you see that all the systems are the same. At the top are the same. You can find in the first part, and the top is the same, same idea. You can mention, for instance, the Muhammad or Christians or India, for instance, the Vedanta, Vaita, and so on and so on and so on. All those systems are the same, And when I see secret doctrine, and I compare with my friends. For instance, on Sunday morning, I go with a friend of mine that is Vedanta, and he talked with his own experience, with his own understanding, and I talk with these ideas of Theosophy, and we get happy, even though some of the terminology that we use, even though he speaks very good Sanskrit, but he doesn't know those words. And I said, no, this is what you say here, this is what you say here, and I have the glossary, and have the second doctrine. See, this says this. He says, oh yes, and on the Gita or Mahabharata or Bhagavatam, he uses a lot Bhagavatam. It says this and this and this, and this says this and this and this, and we are happy.
Yeah, go ahead. Please.
H.P.B talks about all these different systems in the secret doctrine, and as Luis just pointed out, all that is to get you to logically consider the ideas and what is possible. But that's all just logical thinking. That's the bottom plane of where you're trying to go. And all the systems, their point, if you're studying Plato, if you're studying Sufism, if you're studying Theosophy, if you're studying Vedanta, if you're a Buddhist, you're trying to get to the source. And everything that you read is an interpretation of the source from either someone that has been there, late in the experience, or they've studied very intently and learned the system. Buddhist is a system. Theosophy is a system. So that's like the starting place. So when she's giving this thing between the book of nature, we tend to think of nature as what we see. And then what is behind nature to why do plants grow in a particular direction? Why do they only grow at a particular time? That's like science studying how nature is working. It's all from this plane. The inner sense is the intelligence that the plant has or that the animal has that we can learn from by observing its exterior actions. But there's the next plane, which is the mystical, mindful. And so when she's saying you have to combine the mystical, that's what she's talking about. She's not talking specifically, partly, she's talking about mystical writers, but that's still to get your mind to consider where your mind can go. But it's the starting point. So if we go to just a couple sections, I want to read in The Voice of the Silence, which is her book on meditation. So she says in the very early, page 15, she says, desire nothing, chase not at karma, nor nature's changeless laws. So here she's saying nature, metaphysical nature, spiritual nature, physical nature, its laws are changeless. You can't manipulate the laws of nature. You can manipulate the laws of man. You can interpret them however you want. You can manipulate the laws of religion because a different prophet is going to give you a different law and a different interpretation. And a different sect of a different religion is going to give you a different interpretation. But she says nature's laws, nature's changeless laws, take not at karma nor nature's changeless laws, but struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable, which is basically physical existence. Struggle with that. Get control. Help nature and work on with her and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. So that was the life of Paracelsus. Paracelsus was a mystical doctor that, because of his spiritual development, he could know, I have something wrong, I have a disease, and Nastasia has a disease, the same disease. The cure is different. So he would make a cure out of herbs for me that was different from Nastasia based on our inner constitution, not on the disease. And so he learned that by this method of mystical development.
Sure.
So then the next thing, so nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance, and she will open wide before thee the portals of her secret chambers, lay bare before thy gaze the treasures hidden in the very depths of her pure virgin bosom. Unsullied by the hand of nature, she shows her treasures only to the eye of spirit, the eye which never closes, the eye for which there is no veil in all her kingdoms. So that's very early in the secret doctrine. So she's saying, whatever system you're using, you have to use it to get control of your lower mind, and our lower mind is to start talking about something, and before you know it, 10 minutes later, we've talked about 50 different things. Or we start looking up something on the internet, and before you know it, you're way off on some other track.
16 windows open.
Yeah,
I'm gonna read that later.
and then you just keep going. So then,
You don't forget.
yeah, then you forget why you started looking in the first place. So then later, she's talking about these different levels of mind. So this is in the two paths on page 27. It's not that much further along, but still, she says, yea, ignorance. Well, let me go above that. Search for the paths, but O Lenu, be of clean heart before thou startest on thy journey. Before thou takest the first step, learn to discern the real from the false, the ever fleeting from the everlasting. Learn above all to separate head learning from soul wisdom, the eye from the heart doctrine. So here she's talking about two different types of learning that we do anyway, in spite of whether we're trying to or not, we have both of those types of learning. She says, yea, ignorance is like unto a closed and airless vessel, the soul a bird shut up within. It warbles not, nor can it stir a feather, but the songster mute and torpid sits and exhaustion dies. That's ignorance. But even ignorance is better than head learning with no full wisdom to illuminate and guide it. The seeds of wisdom cannot sprout and grow in airless space. To live and reap experience, the mind needs depths and breadth and points to draw it towards the diamond soul. Seek not those points in Maya's, but soar beyond illusion. Search the eternal and changeless set, mistrusting fancy's false suggestions. So in her explanation or definition of the diamond soul, Vajrayana, is a title of the Supreme Buddha, the Lord of all mysteries, called Vajradhara and Adi Buddha. So in those couple of verses, she's explaining what she means there. To start on the path, we have to start with brotherhood. If you don't realize that brotherhood is a fact in nature, whether you like it or not, it's a changeless fact. And so with that, you're at least logically telling your heart that you have to start there, because otherwise nature's not going to deal with you. You can be the smartest person. You could be Elon Musk. And you could have all these different avenues of development and invention and money and recognition, but nature is not going to show you this level of consciousness. And that's in very short sentence that you started with, that's really what she's saying. And she's just putting it out very plainly. And at the end of all her writings, all her articles, she gives us the voice of the silence to kind of narrow it down to say, look, this is what all the science, this is what all the comparative religion, this is what all the metaphysics is about. Now you have to learn how to apply it.
There's almost a tradition of great teachers and thinkers right before they die or near to the last thing they write being like an effort to make a concise message of like their life's teachings and things like that. Like Jung did it. Like it's pretty great. And I mean that book is one that like I've given that book out to a lot of people that no idea about Theosophy, no interest, like forcefully don't want to know about Theosophy, but they're like, this is beautiful. And it's like, yeah, it's kind of it's a really
It's also, like Nastasha said, the early students had to memorize their teaching. They had to memorize it. And part of that training is to actually give you a discipline to your mind and show your mind that, yes, you can do this. You don't think you can do it, but if you apply yourself, you can do it. And to do that, to memorize something, especially to memorize a pretty involved text, you have to spend a lot of focused energy. So in a certain way, that's what those disciplines were doing. But at the same time, you have to learn the system. But once you learn the system, then they can talk to you, and the intuitiveness that you two can communicate with starts to open up, and that's the next level. That's where Luis was talking about. He can talk to his Vedanta friend and who knows nothing about Theosophy. Luis can talk to him about Theosophy, and they can have a conversation. The same way that Nastasha was telling us way back in ancient times when people went on trading routes. They came from different schools, different language, different philosophy, different religions, but they could communicate. And once they figured out how to communicate, then it kind of blossomed because you're getting the intuitive expression between different cultures.
yeah. Which is also the sharing of cultures is so necessary for culture and to to continue to have full and vibrant cultures as well, and access to the things that these cultures provide. I mean, you say like co-opting cultural, of reappropriating someone's culture, but at the same time, it's like kind of it's the way we get the best things of cultures by sharing our cultures. Beautiful. Yeah, go ahead.
So, I don't want to interrupt.
No, you're fine.
I thought you were gonna
Perfect.
jump to
No,
another.
it's thoughts time.
I was gonna say that, well, you just sparked something else, but that was, within the Quran, it states that I created different nations so you could learn from them. Not to make you all one, like, Tower of Babel, So anyway, but when I first read that, I thought that was really beautiful. To learn from one another.
Yeah, it's really
There's
big.
differences. There's same, there's difference. And so I just wanted to state in Timaeus, and I won't read it, but it goes into, there's a term that's used in this translation, eternal nature, and which has a distinction. And it goes along with the topic of Timaeus. So, but there's the term that's used, eternal nature. And I was going to say that there's a difference between we tend to, when we use the word idea, we tend to use it as concepts. And within Greek, within the Socratic, the Hellenic line of school, it's idios and it's beholding, it's seeing, it's not conceptual. And so,
The term idea.
idios in Greek is to behold, to see. So it's
That's,
Is that a concept?
yeah,
it's not a concept.
idiot means the opposite. That's really interesting. You
Um,
don't see, that's the whole meaning.
so ideas in our modern day or in English or in other languages, it's concept, and that's not how it's used at all within this lineage. And so for me, because I do study different traditions for my practice, it's a practice. And within the Hellenic Socratic method, it's a practice, and it's a yoga, and it's a jnana yoga, and it's as well. And so, and there's also the form of the dialectic that Parmenides and Plato speak to, which is a part of reasoning, but it's that reasoning into a jnana yoga. It's a higher concept of the use of reason, the mind, and so,
It's kind of empiric knowledge.
huh?
It's kind of empiric knowledge.
Empiric knowledge.
Right.
It's that form of jnana yoga. I mean, that's the best way I can
Yeah.
explain it, to try to transfer it over into this group. And so, so when I'm involved with, say, reading the Plato dialogues, I'm involved in a practice, and it's a very spiritual, metaphysical tradition.
Mhm.
And that's where earlier I was saying there's that lineage along with the Tibetan Buddhism, a certain lineage of the Milarepa school, that there's a correlation, a similar path. As you'll find Vedic ideas, within the ancient Indian, you'll find them, like when I was studying Parmenides, I was like, oh my gosh, there was that one text that you mentioned, that we were studying out of Vedanta. The other one. There was another one, and it was like, oh, that's in, and I can't remember the text. So there's, you can find the similar practice. Like, so when you were reading that, it was similar to the practice that I have.
Thank you.
Well, I'm glad you mentioned that, because sometimes, especially also when you translate something, you find 10 synonyms, but sometimes the synonym may not translate exactly.
Right.
What are others.
There's a real,
And so there's something there that you lose sometimes in some spaces because of what you said. But anyway, I'm happy to hear that, because kind of was in a disagreement. I don't know why with those two terms. But going back, and then you mentioned eternal nature, then calling better the voice about nature. So in Theosophy, we learn a new language, really, because the terminology, you don't see it as you used to. Now, nature means something totally different for most of the students, because then you begin to use the term nature. So what is the nature of humanity? And then you can explain about the 7 principles, in nature and in humanity. And then that opens why. Because each principle in humanity, it corresponds to a principle in the universe or in your planet or your solar system. Each one. So you can go 7-fold, grades, 49 many different things with the idea of nature. And you could even say, well, we have a not total nature, but our nature has two aspects. So we have our lower nature, which is what Colin was mentioning in the voice of the silence, and that's what we need to work with to kind of change it. Maybe not get rid of it, but kind of transform it, our lower nature, because we have this higher eternal nature. And in theosophy, we get names, Salma Buddhimanas, and then the triad, the quaternary. So just an example of terminology that with theosophy, if you read a term, it's not what you read 10 years ago. It's totally completely different idea for the term.
But this is going along, I just wanted to add this, Timaeus is going along with what you were talking about. It's a likely story of the cosmos and soul in the cosmos. And then there's a hierarchy of the generation of this cosmos and the cause of cause, and becoming and being. So these are the ideas that are explored within Timaeus. So I was just, when I was rereading this, the eternal nature, popped out to me the other day, to where it's a distinction,
Yeah.
Luis, you want to say something?
Yeah, I was discussing with my friend, Nikia, because we were talking about the same issue, about nature and second of nature, and he mentioned me some of the gurus in India who sent Swami Prabhupada to here to United States. And I mentioned him Maimonides. Maimonides was a devotee from Rabbi Akiva. And from then it was a lineage in Spain. He says, okay, oh yes, he was very, very open mind. He was very open mind. Because one of the Krishna's devotees are very close. You cannot talk with them. You have to talk only what they. And Nitya is very open mind. He says, oh yes, yeah, Maimonides was a very nice person, and he was a doctor, and also he was a Kabbalist. Very open discussion with him.
lawyer too.
Yeah.
It's awesome. Yeah, I think it's a lot of really good takes, guys. Appreciate that. I guess we'll move back into the history. It's difficult to just kind of jump back into the history after all that, like the discussions, these principles. But I mean, that's how these principles were brought up, and especially in these early publications, which is super cool. But I wanted to read this we've been talking, kind of shift back into the relation of politics with theosophy, and how even with some safeguards, a lot of times you can do your best and karma has different plans, and you're going to be pulled into the political world for good or bad, regardless, all of your preparations. So in conclusion, towards the end of that, what are Theosophists says, like the second thing she says, in conclusion, we may state that broader and far more universal in its views than any existing mere scientific society, it has plus science, its belief in every possibility and determined will to penetrate into those unknown spiritual regions which exact science pretends that its votaries have no business to explore. And it has one quality more than any religion in that it makes no difference between Gentile, Jew, or Christian. It is in the spirit of the society that has been established upon the footing of universal brotherhood. And this is the part where you can really see the politics of the day kind of being referred to, other than the actual concept. Unconcerned about politics, hostile to the insane dreams of socialism and communism, which it abhors, as both are but disguised conspiracies of brutal force and sluggishness against honest labor. The society cares but little about the outward human management of the material world. The whole of its aspirations are directed towards the occult truths of the visible and invisible worlds. Whether the physical man be under the rule of an empire or a republic concerns only the man of matter. His body may be enslaved as to his soul. He has the right to give to his rulers the proud answer of Socrates to his judges. They have no sway over the inner man. We spoke about that in earlier classes, that idea of not being imprisoned in your mind, your higher self. But there's that interesting part here where when she speaks about socialism here, it's very similar to the way she speaks about Christianity. She's not attacking the concept of socialism. She's almost attacking what the current zeitgeist and manipulation of what Marxism was in this early time. It's almost with a sense of heartbreak when she talks about what's happened to Christianity since Christ. A lot of that is there's something behind the animosity. It's heartbreak. Right. And I think that's kind of what this is. It's not her saying the idea of, law of consecration within a spiritual society is wrong. It's that it gets co-opted. Let's see here. Tanya, I think you probably have something to say about this part. I know you've been studying the book.
No. Only a little bit. Oh, this one was written so long, right? I think 1988,
Yeah.
something like that. But this one is still in the present.
Mm-hmm.
You're talking about the religion, different kind of the religion. It's the manipulate, still manipulate. It's still manipulate. Everybody want to attract,
Mm-hmm.
like a number, like a money, some with all of the respect, some religion ask for money, for mind. This is the point. Also for the mind, they want to control the mind for manipulation. I have an example when I read Plato. I didn't understand all, but I think so. It's something else. When I read, I say it's something else. When I read Socrates, I say it's something else. But when I came here, they give me the key to understand more, to open my mind. So that's what happened with all the book. If they don't have it, that specific key, the really key, they don't open the door.
Mm-hmm.
So if this one happened, and unfortunately, it still happened. And before they was talking, because it's I marked something. They asked, I think in the page, okay, in the page before, okay, we said the first and the second and the final. They say we have to comprehend the genuine principle, something like that. They say. I only try to read here. We have to, but it's no intellect. That's the point. Like the voice say, it's not that intellect, because I read, I translate, but after that I had to not to keep reading, is to think what she want to tell me. Because this one they say she doesn't mind about the outside, the physical, say about the physical, right? They say she doesn't want about the physical, no anything. Let's see what exactly say. Talking about also the exact science, pretend that is for science or have to business to explore it. Like I said, my English is not so good.
That's the part you just read.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's it, because she's prepared. She doesn't want to talk about anything material because she doesn't want anything. It's only the internet, the real main. They want like to open
Mhm.
to open it, but not force. It's only to, that's why she say to think about, but not with the mind,
Mhm.
not with the brain.
Mhm.
That's it. Because the brain is only the vehicle. We have to go through about. That's why we study because we didn't. I think so. We don't study all about la concentración concentration, and then we study about Chela life. No, it's a step by step. They explain. They give you the warning first, and they say, okay, but you have to at least to try.
Mhm.
We have to at least to try. That's why they say also here that we talk about the Pacific mind. The Pacific mind is so dangerous because they can influence any kind of the idea. Doesn't matter what idea is.
Mhm.
They can. So we have to have it control in what we really believe, because if we don't have it perfect. I can say perfect foundation
Mhm.
or really foundation. The house can be cracked for a small square.
Mhm.
For a small movement, go down. So, Madame Blavatsky giving us the tool to have a foundation.
Mhm.
Because if we don't have a foundation, any kind of people coming to you, and you incline. What happened with you believe with we style?
Mhm.
We couldn't stay with two people to say, I'm going to believe in this one and that one, but not like a dogmatic. If we have to be free or dogmatic, no, we have to question. Whatever they say, we have to question,
Right.
not only believe. I hopefully.
No, I think you're right on that really important point. There's so many people. I mean, I've been asked this when people have wanted to do little interviews with doctors. They ask, why do you guys study so many different disciplines and different traditions? Isn't it just muddying the waters? And it's a perfect point right there. It's just as important as lineage. If you're able to, find the exact same belief in something that's on a different continent that never should have had any contact at all, that's a pretty cool sign that there's some truth there, that there's some underlying truth, and let's keep going back. But there's other things that's why, a lot of people have a rough time like logically thinking and stuff with like newer ideas like Scientology and stuff. A lot of stuff that Scientology is teaching you can't find in other traditions or other parallels. I'm sure you can in some things, but like there isn't the just mass parallels like there is between Vedic tradition and Buddhism, or even like the Platonic schools and Vedantic schools. Like you don't see that. And so I think that's right on there. And that's kind of how I try to answer that. But you said it a great way. It's like it's so we can reinforce this concept of truth and like wisdom religion, like and wisdom tradition. If we, chances are there's not a lot of concepts you hear Blavatsky bring up that can be found nowhere else. That's pretty tough to find. And even the ones that maybe appear that there are, she makes clear that nothing she's saying that she's the source of, and so that's a big difference between her and other religions, and especially people that are in religions. Is that's how you get power in a religion, is you make yourself an intermediary between them and salvation or them and enlightenment. And she never did that. There's no rule that she's going to be at the gates of heaven judging us before we're going to get in. She never did that. So I like that. But yeah, thank you so much. That's such a valuable thing to remember. Yeah, and so here I'm going to read a little bit more of kind of we're getting into this realm again of like politics and belief and politics, and you can't, if we're going to be in the world, if we're not going to separate ourselves completely in some commune and cut ourselves off, we're going to be moved by the tug and, you know, pull and tug of politics, no matter what. And so basically, she has this thing about of socialism where it sounds kind of harsh, but at the same time, like she says back at here, I'll read this real quick. It's at the end of 75. The achievements of politics conceived as the quest for power will always disappoint humanitarians who choose the method of reform for the reason that the rearrangement of social organization can never of itself bring about the betterment of human beings in any real sense. The betterment of man is the betterment of human understanding. And when this is gained, the difficulties of social organization will take care of themselves, or at least will no longer be the apparently insoluble problems they represent today. Preoccupation with politics obscures the real process of moral and social change, which ought to be the study of men of goodwill. I just wanted to read this real quick. I wanted to get over her kind of, I'm going to skip a lot of this. It kind of explains the Buddhist perspective of socialism, and then how she was speaking more about how early Marxism and the politics of Eastern Europe at the time. Plainly, socialism of this sort is unconnected with any special economic or political theory, but embodies the generous spirit of human brotherhood, which is the principal inspiration of the Theosophical Movement. So much like politics today, and she's not saying the whole fundamental idea of living with shared, property and ownership is bad. She's saying it being used it being weaponized for political purposes is, and that's what happens with almost every cool belief.
Well, if you look at politics, the whole thing with politics or religion is a limited brotherhood.
Good.
Only brotherhood among those that believe or those that go along. She's trying to point out that if everyone had the as a basis accepted brotherhood and working for the whole, then a lot of problems would be problems. That's the starting point, but you see how far we are. And there's people that know that, and it's a fear, so that's how it's so easy to produce the friction, is because it's like, well, it's them and us.
I mean, you
It's
see,
them against us.
secret of power is just divide and conquer. I've spoken before in class about that fellow, had a chance to be part of an interview with this really powerful billionaire named Peter Thiel. And when you try to talk to him about his real opinions, like his real values, you don't get much.
He doesn't have that.
You get political answers, and then you see what he does politically and in business, and it makes no sense to me because aren't those people that you wouldn't invest in? Aren't those the bad guys? He's looking 50 moves ahead as to what will cause instability, just the way pharmaceutical companies have gotten in trouble for keeping instability in poor countries so they can have a cheaper test, population. It was very similar.
Yeah.
And it's too bad. You say so much.
I was just gonna say, capitalism, I'll just say, has a bad rap because people in colleges and then just in the osmosis, people read Wealth of Nations, Adam Smith, and it's very common reading. But what they don't read is Adam Smith's theory of moral sentiments. And they were written both together, one after the other. There's some question which one he wrote first. But they were meant to be read together. And when you read it, the theory of moral sentiments, it's like, oh, especially when, the plight of what's you see, like just homelessness and, the poverty and all this stuff. And he talks about man having empathy for your fellow man. And so like when this country was first founded, it was neighbors, community, churches, or other traditions that helped one another. And there was an absolute interconnectedness, like you knew your neighbor who was in difficulties and why or whatever. That's where like the social system worked. But then in 1933, it got removed. And so, so Adam Smith, The Wealth of Nations, you know, people need to read The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And I learned about it through, I was reading the Financial Times, I think it was. And a man who was a billionaire who had a very successful business. And he read The Theory of Moral Sentiments. And he changed the whole way that he did business and his whole way of interacting with the community because of that. And he was still very successful. But
Of course.
you know, his employees were better off, his staff, the community, but it changed him inside, you know, and so it's, you know, it's I think capitalism gets a bad rap because of the one-sidedness
Sure.
of the idea of
Yeah,
it.
extreme capitalism. They didn't take in the other,
Crony. Yeah, it's crony capital.
they didn't take in the other side.
Right, and
Yeah,
it means that they.
It's the same
they're fellow
thing.
man, and
Same
he's-
thing with Soviet.
And it's like this
supposed-
thick, the book is this thick.
Yeah.
And it's very, very, very powerful. Yeah.
Yeah.
And of course, you can see why universities don't want their students to.
And I think we're encouraged to study that kind of stuff, because if there's anything that she wasn't much of an absolutist. Like, she definitely, I mean, this is the thing too, we forget that she was all about the concept of constructive criticism. Without constructive criticism, science would be nowhere. Without peer-reviewed papers and studies, we'd be nowhere. Without constructive criticism, some people don't agree with me, but I think it's an absolutely necessary part of the arts. I mean, Shakespeare's he talks about how his really first bad review it's famous. He talks about how it spurred him on and how it like made him better because it was an accurate criticism. He's like, man, this guy's got a point. And I think that's something, and it's not just criticism, it's how important it is to have an open forum of communication. There's so many religions that consolidate power because they cut that off. Stop. You have a forum. They provide a forum to talk about their religion. But if you want to question their religion, like, they're not going to provide their own forum for people leaving the faith, you know. And so it is. It's a lot of ways of control, and we think we see them all, but there's no way we see all these, because that's the thing. These are some plans that are 50 moves ahead, and we can see that what's happening. We can see in retrospect, but can we see it far enough ahead to try and intercede? You know, there was the one thing that every, like, Buddha asked, that Jesus asked, that like all of these great teachers that they continue to challenge us with, is like, are you living for the benefit of all mankind or for all living beings? And that's tough.
Well, and another big question is Jesus says, forgive your neighbor. But then the big question then is, who's your neighbor?
Right.
Because a lot of Christians want to say, my fellow Christians are my neighbor. They don't want to
A lot of those old
do
books,
the neighbor.
we're talking why translations are so important, because a lot of times in some of these old books, it doesn't refer to everyone. It might only refer to people that are active members of the faith. But like, that's why language is so important. And definitely.
And also, I just want to state, I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
The only thing I want to state as well is that in the ancient manuscripts, there were not chapters, there were no chapter headings,
Or Bible.
there were no verse numbers. And the very fact of where in any text, and I'm not just speaking to the Bible, in any text, but where you break off, and you break off it into this chapter to the next chapter, it breaks what's being discussed. And also within Greek, it's not linear.
Mhm.
You know, it's looking at a paragraph and pulling together what you see from that paragraph. It's not the same form as, so anyway, so that's another problem because of the way that a lot of these books are
Go ahead.
constructed
Yeah.
in their translations.
Thank you. You're gonna wait for kind of go first.
Okay. No, I just remember one conversation, they had a chaplain,
Chaplain?
Albert Einstein. Okay? Albert Einstein said to Chaplin, oh my goodness, you are so smart. You don't say anything, but everybody understands. And Chaplin said to Albert Einstein, no, you are more smart. You take 1 hour to explain about reality, equation, all,
Relative,
yes,
relativity.
relativity, and they don't understand to you anything.
Well,
That's the one.
yeah.
That's the one.
Well, it's wonderful. It's just like what we're talking about. The theory of relativity, he put that forth in a peer-reviewed paper. He has many places where he said he was literally just waiting for it to get ripped apart. He did not believe in it. The math worked, but he was like, no way. He was basically putting it out there for someone to be like, this is where you messed up. He was like, this can't be. And the more it got reviewed, the more people were like, yeah, this checks out. I mean, that's fashioned our entire world of technology today. I mean, it's wild how every report about hadron collision, like coming up with these new particles and doing all this stuff every day. And it's regarding that math. They've made little adjustments here and there, I guess, like in the physicist world. I don't know a lot about it, but it's still right there. And
The one person that he considered was beyond him was Kurt Gödel. Kurt Gödel was brilliant, and he stayed at Princeton so that they both could continue to walk every morning together.
oh, yeah,
They talked about time.
Yeah.
And Kurt Gödel, yeah, he was brilliant. There's a lot of prejudice against him because of the prejudice for Einstein. People don't like to hear that Kurt Gödel, Einstein considered his equal or above.
sure,
They
sure.
both challenged each other.
sure. Thank you. Luis,
I was part of the Communist Party, and what they offered me was, in order to change the history.
this is El Salvador.
Countries, you have to follow the leaders in order to change the history of things. And also I was part of the church. In church, they gave me a dogma. In order to change these things, you have to follow the spiritual leaders. It was the same thing.
Mhm.
The parallelism is the same.
And unfortunately, it's not wrong.
When I came to Theosophy, what the Theosophy philosophy says is a problem, you have to solve it. You are responsible for what you created.
Mhm.
You need to have a better life. You have to change it. You have to be part of the solution, not the problem. The perspective is really different. Way different.
I'll tell you what, like, speaking of learning things through your own inner nature, or intrinsically, or through just any occult means, is definitely part of that. Because, you know, I've been raised similarly, and I've been a lot of philosophical lessons that's the way to live. That, you know, that to really, that if I need that, if there's a difference in myself in the future, I need to step up. I can't just be a thing in the tide. But that's one of those things that I could never accept on a purely intellectual basis. That's the lesson that I've learned through like arts, that I've learned through poetry, music, and plays, and movies. I've learned it. I've had to feel it in my heart before I could accept it. Like, well, I guess I gotta try. You know, and that's it's something. It's definitely something that I couldn't ever just accept and learn by the raw, mundane fact of it, you know. So thank you. Anybody else have any closing thoughts?
Well, we should finish this chapter next week though, because it's the fourth.
It's really important. It's really important. Well, we'll continue on page 77 right here because we're gonna get into discussion when the Christian missionaries really start kicking against the influence of Theosophy, especially when a lot of very influential Brahmins and Hindus and practitioners of the Vedic system are converting and not converting to Christianity. They're not converting to Theosophy, but they're not converting to Christianity, and that becomes kind of a big problem. So yeah, it's very important. Probably finish it next week, and then I'm also going to include PDFs of the 2 articles we talked about this week because they're just so important. And yeah, we'll continue next week and see where we go.
What 2 articles you said?
What
are Theosophists?
What is Theosophy and what are the Theosophists? They're all in the articles, volume 1, bunch of stuff. They're in a bunch of places, but
When they gonna be on Arte?
huh?
When they gonna be on Arte?
Oh, dude, those things take forever. Like next year probably. Those things.
The what?
That documentary.
Because,
These European documentaries are very well regarded in Europe, like big channel. But they're doing a whole like hour documentary on like the spiritual scene in Los Angeles. So they got a lot to do. But
I've been trying to
Who did they talk to?
they talked to me. They talked a ton to Alex. Alex actually let him film part of his class. They came in and talked to me after one class, but like mostly talked to me. Their one thing for me was like the difference between Theosophy and the New Age. They wanted to know like the gap. But I'm pretty good at subjects like that. But it's really cool if you guys ever want to check them out. Unfortunately, to watch them from the US, you have to use a VPN. But I can send a link where a bunch of his work is free if you want to use a VPN. And it's cool because everything he's worked on is mostly like spiritual or at least like indigenous cultures. He did an awesome thing on Yazidi Kurds a couple of years ago during the ISIS stuff. It was amazing. So yeah, he's really good. It's called Arte, Art-E with a little comma, A. It's like a huge documentary channel. It's kind of like Vice, if Vice had like morals in here. Yeah.
PDF, it's like a PDF.
Yeah, it's a lot more. I think it's probably got a lot more public funding because it's Europe. They have a lot of that stuff too. So, yeah. Anyway, thanks for being here, guys. Anybody on the line? Barbara? Anybody who's got a line?
I just want to thank you for the class. And do you think it's like the Gaia channel?
What's that?
You think it's like the Gaia channel?
It's probably. I don't. What's the Gaia channel?
The Gaia channel has all New Age things on it. GAIA.
I'll check that out tonight. Yeah.
Check it out. They have a special. You can watch it, I think, for a week or something and see if you like it.
Cool. And then I'll probably send out a link to this other channel stuff, and like maybe I'll put really easy instructions how to do a VPN. Watch it.
Yeah, I would like to see that actually, since I'm a documentary filmmaker, and I do stuff like that. Yes. It would be
Oh
nice.
wow! Amazing.
Yeah.
You should then be doing a documentary on Theosophy.
Yeah. Nice.
Someone one day is going to do a really high quality documentary on Theosophy, especially the early years, and someone's going to hit it out of the park. Like it's going to happen. It's inevitable, you know.
And then you have.
Oh, we can talk about it. It'd be nice.
Yeah.
All right, Barbara, I'll email you this week.
Okay. Thank you.
Have a good night.
Thanks, Barbara. Thanks, Rose.
Thanks, Rose.
Thank you. Night.
Thanks, Oscar.